I think we have to be quiet for like a
Welcome to all our comrades around the world to the Socialist Sunday Stream.
Okay, I think it's finished.
Great.
We're live. We're live. We're live, people.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
And we have
Yeah.
Mexie with us today.
What's up?
Do you want to introduce yourself? I guess everyone knows who you are, but you can
Yeah,
introduce
I
yourself.
will introduce myself. So I'm Mexie. I have a YouTube channel named Mexie, Mexie, where I talk about political economy and environmentalism and veganism. Basically, my thing now is just total liberation. So I basically just talk about total liberation, but it's mostly just political economic analyses of things that are going on. And I also co-host a podcast with a privileged vegan who is amazing. And it's called The Vegan Vanguard. And we kind of talk about similar things, but it's just in longer form, or we can really dig into things more than like a video format. So check us out. And that's who I am. Yeah.
Yeah, so today we wanted to talk a bit about your video that you just uploaded and some of the backlash that you've been getting, and also about capital R revolution and patriarchy in our movement. So yeah, do you want to talk a bit about the kind of responses that you've been getting to your video and how frustrating it's been?
Yeah, well, it's been. Here's the thing. I always just focus on the negative, and I really should actually pay more attention to the fact that, you know, overall the response has actually been overwhelmingly positive, and people have been really, really happy that I put this out and like engaging with the issues in good faith and blah, blah, blah. And then there were a lot of people who, you know, disagreed and sent me messages about it, but like in really good faith in ways that really opened up a lot of great dialogue and things like that. And then there was obviously a lot of backlash from people who were just absolutely enraged and were just coming at me with these fronts of, you know, well, I mean, there's a number of things. So what I talked about in the video was basically reciprocity. So the idea of making sure that whatever future we're building in the future is reciprocal and sustainable. And so I had a lot of people talking about how this was just, you know, coded primitivism and, you know, some really like coded racist stuff about indigenous people and their management systems and their worldviews and things like that. And how, just a lot of like just awful stuff about how like they have nothing to teach us, and just, you know, a lot of kind of dogmatic stuff about how, you know, colonialism and capitalism was good actually because it advanced the material conditions, which is what we need for socialism, and we can't look backwards at these, you know, backwards ideas and management systems of indigenous folks and all this stuff. So there was that kind of a flex, which was very annoying, and people saying that like what I was saying or trying to argue for was just like pseudoscientific, which I'll get back to later. And then there was a lot of people just getting really mad about my framing of the way that certain people, and like the way that I hear a lot of people talking about revolution and capital R revolution and stuff as being patriarchal or rooted in like patriarchal modes of thought and such. And people were just like, don't you know there were women revolutionaries and how dare you? And, you know, people were just like really pissed about that. And again, like just really not coming to me from a place of humility and wonder, but coming to me from a place of like, these are all the reasons you're wrong, and like you need to stop talking, basically.
Those are places of insecurity and fear.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, spot on.
Yeah, I definitely hope so. And then what other flexes did I get? Yeah, I mean, I guess just more about like the materialist and the scientific and all of this stuff, and how, I don't know, just that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was pretty frustrating. I mean, I'm fine to get it from like random 20-year-old kids on Twitter, but like I actually had some like in real life comrades messaging me about this stuff, or like people that I respect like more than just random trolls saying a lot of like really weird stuff that was very disheartening. So, but I mean, again, like overall, it was a very positive response. And actually, the negative backlash has then inspired me to create a follow-up video, which is coming out this week, in which I actually really dig in a lot more to these ideas. And I'm actually like super excited about it because, yeah, hey.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. We're looking forward to
Can't
that
wait.
one. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, but
Yeah, where to start?
yeah. I guess we can talk first about like patriarchy in general in leftist spaces and like our own experiences with that. And I know like Paul, you made a video about brocialism as well, which was really interesting. So like some of
Thank you.
your experiences I think would be really interesting to talk about as well. But like
Yeah.
I'll let you guys start. I feel like it's a trap.
It never is. With these people, it never is.
No, I'm kidding. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Catherine, like, do you want to start?
Yeah, well, I guess I was kind of talking to you about this, Mexie, before, but I've just been finding it so incredibly frustrating that anytime I kind of enter any leftist space, it's almost always dominated by men, like 95% men and just like a few women. It was like that at university, like in my current city, another city that I was in, it's always so male dominated. And I think that there's a real problem when like leftist spaces are so like whether deliberately or subconsciously, like I mean I'm sure it's not deliberate that they're excluding women, but there's definitely things that like are happening that mean that women don't feel like they're comfortable in those spaces. And yeah, I had so many experiences where it just became about, it seemed like so masculinist in the way that like the discussion was going, and it was all about like people trying to be like, oh, Marxist-Leninism is right, and then arguing against Trotskyists and anarchists against Marxists, and very like competitive in the way that people are approaching things. And it's kind of in so many ways reproducing capitalist like ideologies and the way that they're going about things, and also even just in terms of like how conversation goes, being like very male dominated and speaking over minorities a lot of the time, and like all about who can have the loudest voice. And I guess it depends, because there's some places where they have really good, I don't know what you call it, but you know, like, oh, this person is talking now and then this person, and then like so that everyone has a voice if they want it. So I guess things like that can overcome it. But yeah, I was saying to Mexie that I had this experience where I was I went to this like a 3-day activist conference thing, and the first day was like just for women, for like it was a feminist day, and there was such a contrast between that day and the other 2 days where the men came and it was more about general activism and organizing. And on the first day, it was just so much lots of people listening, lots of people raising their hands, and like real good discussion and caring for each other and like listening and all of that. And then the next 2 days, there were still like all the same women were there, or most of them. But then, sorry, by the way, and this is very like binary kind of women-men discussion, but you know what I mean? Like people who identify as women. And yeah, and then as soon as like the on the next 2 days, like it just felt like the people who identify as women weren't able to get their voices heard, like were raising their hands so much less, men were dominating the conversation, and it was just and it was so much infighting and arguing, and nothing really got done, and it was just so frustrating to see. And I just feel like it just happens so often, and even in spaces where like I don't know, I just feel like it's often, even amongst my friends, some of whom are like the most like anti-capitalist and really want to get involved in these spaces, they're just so turned off by them as soon as they like go into them. by the way in which it's not even like the people individually are nice, but just the way they're structured and everything like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I actually used that example that Catherine shared in my latest video because I think it's really, really telling. And someone in the chat just said something about like, oh, you know, people were killed over these differences. So like, you want us to just come together and ignore the conflict. So like, no, like we don't have to ignore conflict, but like there's a very different way of approaching conflict when you're approaching it from a standpoint of humility and wonder and caring and empathy rather than a standpoint of, I'm going to prove that I'm right and I'm going to get everyone else to shut up and know that I'm right. Because at the end of the day, you know, like what I got from talking to a lot of people who were like, you know, yelling about what I had said was, I mean, A, there's just like a lot of disagreements, but also B, like we all generally want the same thing, you know?
Yeah.
Like people aren't wanting that different of an outcome. And so we have to be able to actually talk productively about strategies for reaching that outcome in the here and now that don't get tripped up in just like egoism or competitiveness or just violent ways of talking to one another and violent ways of approaching these subjects together. And yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, patriarchy and capitalism are so incredibly linked. Like Marina and I did a podcast about could capitalism exist without patriarchy? And we kind of talked about how like capitalism is the very logical conclusion of, you know, thousands of years of patriarchal modes of governance and modes of thought and modes of interacting with one another, which goes beyond like, we're not saying just patriarchy as in, you know, men having positions of power and women being disenfranchised. We're talking about patriarchy, like the ideology and the values of patriarchy as well, that really valorize like toxic masculinity and toxically masculine ways of engaging with other people. And, you know, competition and dominance and might is right and all of that stuff. And so like, yeah, like capitalism as a system flows very nicely out of that kind of a mode of governance because look, yes, if you are dominant and you are like oppressive, then you'll get the spoils. Like that's how you rise up in this society is being like a proverbially like toxically masculine person, just like in your business endeavors, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what's valorized. So yeah, like coming at this, I mean, it's just very, very telling that like the first day where it was non-men, and again, like there's nothing inherent in men or inherent in women or inherent in like non-binary, like there's something inherent in anybody that would make them be unproductive or you know, it's not like people want to be unproductive, but we've all been socialized in different ways under patriarchy and capitalism, and that affects how we think about things and how we talk about things and how we engage with people in a room. And so it's very, very telling that like the first day, as you said, was like so productive and wonderful. And then it just evolved into like MLs yelling at trots, yelling at anarchists, yelling at like whatever, and trying to prove like who's right, who's wrong, instead of thinking about like, okay, here we are today in the here and now, and this is the goal we have. So like, let's come together and strategize for right now, and let's build upon what people have done in the past. Like the material conditions are so different now.
Yeah.
And you know, like let's build and let's bring in other things that can really enhance our theory and enhance our praxis. But, you know, a lot of people will just double down and be like, no, that's unscientific. And like, you know, the scientific has also been historically coded as, you know, the rational and masculine. Like it's been coded as like the masculine thing, and that's been set in contrast to, you know, being emotional or intuition or pseudoscience or spirituality of women and indigenous folks and people from other cultures. Like these binaries are still at play today because like they're baked into our society, so we can't just ignore them. And we have to be really conscious of how we move and not replicate all this shit, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And even in like in both Australia and England, when I lived in those countries, there was so many incidents of sexual harassment and abuse within the like bigger socialist party or socialist organizations, and that was either being covered up or being covered up, not really talked about, and like the people that were being accused of this just kept running as if nothing, like as if it wasn't a problem. And I think it stems from this idea that getting rid of capitalism is so much more important than patriarchy, and that patriarchy will naturally dissolve if we get rid of capitalism. The same way as you were talking about in your video, it's like, oh, climate change will naturally like resolve as soon as we switch to like, as soon as we have a revolution in the socialist society or communist society. And it's like, yeah, probably it would be a lot easier for it to get a lot better, but things that we can't wait for this, like, in some ways it's almost pacifying, because it's like, okay, we wait for this one big day of revolution, and in the meantime we don't have to change the way things are currently, or we don't have to change ourselves, transform our communities and things like that, because we're just waiting for this revolution. Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and like just like the framing of it as like there's a difference between framing the goal as the overthrow of the ruling class and the goal as the like beautiful new society with like totally different social relations. Like the first might be a necessary step in the pursuit of the latter, but I feel like the way that it's talked about a lot of times, it's really framed as like the goal is the overthrow, and then like a lot of the other things that are plaguing us are just kind of assumed, like, okay, we'll just deal with it then, right? But I mean, like, yeah, like that'll definitely affect the way that you are approaching your organizing and your strategies and whatever. And I feel like in a lot of these spaces, there's also like, there's just this kind of bravado required, you know? So it's like, even if you are a woman in the room, and even if there is an opportunity for you to speak up, like if you were to speak up and say stuff like this, people would just be like, oh, well, like, we don't have time for this. Like, again, someone's commenting in the chat that like people have been killed over these disagreements, and like people will never come to, you know, and it's just like, of course they've been, but like, who have they been killed by? Like, again, it's like, frankly, like women are always participating, but frankly, it's like men playing war games, and then like men, you know what I mean? Like men being like, my position is right, your position is wrong, you must be killed. Like, you know, like a lot of this is still has been historically patriarchal. And I think we need to move away from that, because very frankly, like, you know, I know like capitalism is the big baddie that we need to get rid of if we want to have a more progressive future. But I actually think that patriarchy is the thing that, I mean, I think it contributed in the past to us like not quite getting there. I mean, obviously like capitalism and pressure contributed to people not getting there. But I think in the future, like patriarchy will very potentially be the thing that keeps us from actually getting to full communism.
But doesn't this like this magical thinking of you know, the revolution is the goal and everything will fall into place automatically? Doesn't it connect? Doesn't it give you like all the red flags and all alarms sound like this is so LARPy? Like,
yes, yeah. And it's annoying because it's like, you know, it's like 20-year-old dudes who are just like, they're so sure of themselves, right? Like they're so sure that like, this is the way it's always been and this is how it's going to be in the future. And if you're not like, you know, there's no way that we can settle these differences and there's no way that we can do this, you know, it's just like, get out of here. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, I don't know. I just, yeah, just this idea, like, cause like, you know, I've like studied this a long time. I've been thinking about this for years. Like, I would never flex like that of like, this is the truth and this is what we must do. But I mean, like, I don't know. It's just, it is very LARPy to me, and like, just I think inexperience. But it's unfortunate because like those voices seem to be the loudest, and then it's not really safe for you in the space. Like if you're someone who wants to be in the space, even if you're not a woman. I mean, I had a lot of like cis men come to me and say thank you for saying what you said, because I feel the same way about a lot of things, but I wouldn't dare bring this up with my leftist friends because they'd call me like an idealist, a liberal, ridiculous, you know, like. again, it's just these grand appeals to the rational authority of like science, objectivist science, and anything else is just decried as emotional, useless, and it's really coded as feminine, and nobody wants to be the person who brings that up in a space where it's like, you know, everyone agrees revolution is not a dinner party. You know what I mean? Like everyone agrees like shit's not going to be like easy, and it's not going to be like, we're not going to just dance into the utopia on like a bed of flowers. Like we're going to have to like get down and dirty, like we really are. Like of course everyone understands that, but it's like there's just no space for like not having that kind of like, I guess I view it as like hyper like, you know, masculinist bravado. I mean, you're just laughed out of the space. So it's like, yeah, you can be there, and yeah, you can raise your voice, but we're still creating these spaces that are like this. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
They would make very good cannon fodder, the masculine people. They'd make fantastic cannon fodder. So yeah, send them to the front. It's fine.
It really reminds me of something that Angie Speaks said that like really stuck with me. And she was talking about how like so often we're so focused on changing the people's material conditions that we forget that like people's subjective needs are just equally as important. And we've kind of left this vacuum of space for like right-wing people to come in, and, you know, with people like Peterson and Trump appealing to people's feelings of alienation and subjective experiences. And I really feel like we're so focused on, the material, that we forget about, like, even if there's a big revolution, if people are still like internally very individualistic and very competitive, and feel alienated, and like almost, you know, the spiritual side of things is equally as like, I know spiritual is such a like a term that, you know, has a lot of different meanings, but still I think people sort of, we need to also be, like you said, building reciprocity and community, and like having these loving connections and bonds with people and the earth and things like that. And I know that sounds like really wishy-washy and idealistic to a lot of people, but even if we have this like large-scale revolution, if our like the way we view each other and ourselves hasn't changed at all, how is that actually going to change the society in any way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I just shared, so I love Adrienne Marie Brown and her sister Autumn, and they have a podcast called How to Survive the End of the World. And Autumn was talking about her experience organizing a cooperative, like it's kind of a business, but it's more so like a group of facilitators for social justice and whatever. But like just her experience working in this cooperative workplace, and just, you know, all of the work that goes into devising democratic collective forums of decision making, and then actually going through those processes together and like making things work, and like managing things as like a cooperative, and just dealing with all of the like interpersonal stuff that goes along with that. And if we're not actually like practicing doing things like that, I don't see how people think that we're gonna just like get a bunch of guns, like devise a military strategy, and then we're gonna end up like, we're not gonna know how to live that way, because we've been so colonized under patriarchy and capitalism. Like we do actually have to prefigure the world. And like people are like, oh, well, if you prefigure it, like that's not enough. Of course it's not enough. Like we have to do more than that. But like people are really ignoring, I think, the prefigurative aspect of this, and writing off a lot of really, really important stuff as just individualist or liberal or all of this crap. But like that's so important to get us to like a better, more egalitarian, just future, you know?
Yeah. I would say it's almost even more individualistic to think, I don't know what you guys think, but to think that like overthrowing like a few rich people is going to solve the problem, because it's like, oh yeah, if we get rid of these individuals, then even if it's many, many of these individuals, then the problem is solved. But actually, then surely that's just individualizing the issue to like a few bad people. And I don't know.
There should be like legs of the same, different legs of the same table. If you know what I mean. Most of these LARPy war-minded people are like they want to be soldiers because they too scared to scrub a toilet. If you know what I mean. They in a way it's all LARPy stuff. Like if you go down to the boots on the ground and people doing actual activism, everybody understands the importance of deconstructing all the patriarchy and all those shitty systems, because you know how counter-revolutionary they are. You know how those behaviors affect the actual work, like boots on the ground, and most
I don't know, like there's definitely there's definitely, I would say, organizing spaces in Toronto and like organizations that, and like from all across the political spectrum or whatever, that like they're not thinking that there's going to be just like one revolution that's going to solve everything necessarily, but like they are still orienting themselves to that, right? Like their whole goal is to get everyone into this like light mission so that eventually we'll have like a critical mass to do that. Yeah. But then the goal after that, like I'm very, it's just like, okay, so the goal after that is then just like centralizing everything, and then everyone will be guaranteed work and they'll just get labor vouchers. It's just like, okay, that's great. I'm like, it's really stoked for the idea of everyone having like food and shelter. But like, there's so much that's not being considered. And I'm frankly just like a bit scared of people who are just like, yeah, we're just gonna do this, and then like, of course you have to like crush all the dissidents, like of course you have to crush the revisionists lest they crush you or whatever. And I'm just like, that's such a masculinist framing as well. And that's not that's not total liberation to me. That's not the society that I'm gunning for here, like, yeah, I don't know.
And I think you're right about what you said, that like this could be why one of the most insignificant reasons why the left isn't like making that much headway, because if we're ostracizing 50% of the population by like ostracizing people who identify as female because we like aren't making space for them, are having such a masculinist framing of revolution that's very like alienating for people who identify as female and often are socialized to not believe in those forms of aggression and like are less likely to want to like take up arms and all of that, then like it's just so bad for our movement. And I guess that those voices are also the ones that like are the loudest a lot of the time, which means that if it ever gets to that point where we're like organizing and stuff, they tend to be the ones that are like at the forefront and leading the way. And yeah, I just feel like there's such a Eurocentric universalism to it as well. It's like, I don't know, you're really, it's kind of neo-colonial in the way, like, oh, that this form of revolution is the only form that can work, and so you're sort of imposing that on all other places in the world, like, best for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, like, I've had to repeat myself like a billion times. Like, I'm just like, how many times do I have to say that I am not against revolutionary violence, or that like, I don't think this transition is going to be non-violent, for people to actually engage more deeply with what I'm actually saying, because people are very like, well, like, of course we're going to have to use violence or like whatever. And I'm just like, yeah, people like, right now, in Chile, people are like lighting shit up, you know what I mean? It's just like, it's great to see people like getting out in the streets and being militant, and like, you don't have to be totally like nonviolent civil disobedience all the time. Like, that's not what I'm saying, even remotely. But yeah, I mean, I think it's also like, not even just like, we're alienating like people who might not have been socialized in that way, because I mean, again, like a lot of like my cis dude friends feel the exact same way, and they don't really know how to talk about it. But also like I'm talking specifically about Canada, right? Nonviolence is a privilege that people in Canada have had for their entire lives, right? Like, and people who are ready for change, like they see the writing on the wall, they know that this way of life is coming to an end. Like it's not sustainable. It's not good for that many people, etc. So people are wanting to prepare. Like, you know, there's all these preppers movements who are like right wing. Like people see that this is not going to be okay in the future. So like we don't have to get everyone. Well, it would just be a lot easier to get everyone on board with like, okay, this is ending. So like, let's get out ahead of this. Let's plan. Let's build community. Let's do this, and like, let's defend ourselves instead of like trying to like rehabilitate images of Stalin and like tell them that like, yeah, we're gonna get this critical mass. You're gonna join a militia. You're gonna overthrow the government, and then you know what I mean, like. I don't know your audience. Like we're trying to build a movement. Like, of course we can't lie to people and say like, oh, this is going to be totally nonviolent and it'll be like just happy and go lucky. But like, I just, you know, maybe there's more possibility of things like that happening in another country, which I also said. But even then, I mean, when's the last time that's actually gone off without a hitch, right? Like in the 60s? Like it's been like 60 years since that's been possible. Like we're in this polar, you know, there's like one dominant power now, the United States. And in this situation, like it's incredibly difficult for something like that to happen. Like maybe it's possible, sure. But I think that I don't know. I think we need to think about what we're going to do in the West more deeply, because I just I don't know. I don't see that being palatable to the majority of people.
For sure, yeah.
And there's no universal recipe. That's the one very annoying thing that I find in these LARPy people, that they think that they have like the universal recipe they found on a book that they read, and it's like when you try to discuss, like this is not, you know, that's very discussable. That's very open for discussion. This may or may not work, and they go like, "Have you read this book?" Like, nah, whatever. It's not about the book, motherfucker. It's about real life circumstances. You know, and those are those people who claim to be like scientific, and it's like, motherfucker, social sciences. Come on. Give me a break. Like, I talk to an actual scientist and talk to them about social sciences. So say how many hands they need to make the air quotes for social sciences, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely take a scientific approach to whatever you're doing in the social sciences, but like, it's really frustrating when, like, and it's really telling also, right? When people in the social sciences or humanities feel like they need to make these grand appeals to objectivist science in order to gain legitimacy. It's like, no, what you're doing has legitimacy. Like, you don't need to you know, double down and be like, well, this is actually a hard science, and like, you know, anyone who believes in science should believe in this perspective, right? Like, you're just, you know, you're just trying to make this appeal to like authority right now, you know, and you don't need to, because like,
that seems like a job for Mr. Insecurity there, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, Paul, do you want to jump in on?
I'm really enjoying listening while talking about this. It's I feel like I'm just watching, like I'm just in the comments, you know, just sort of like the other people in the chat. Like, that's what I feel like right now. I don't. This is amazing. This is so good. I love hearing your takes on this. And there's just so much to sort of digest with everything you said. I totally agree. There's so many different paths we can take to get there. And I'm not wedded to like one ideology. You know, there are certain places where taking like a more anarchist route to socialism might work better. There's some places where taking more of an ML route, or to communism, we might say, is going to work better. I mean, geez, look at Venezuela. Is that democratic socialism? I mean, people don't really talk about that often, but that's, you know, you hear Maduro being described as like an elected dictator, which is just a hilarious thing to describe someone as. Yeah, and people the same thing with like Evo Morales in Bolivia, you know.
Mhm.
And so I think we need to be open to this. I think we need to be open to really be open to a diversity of tactics and not just taking this I don't know liquidate the bourgeoisie attitude. I just, you're gonna alienate everybody when you say that shit, you know. Okay, look, we all enjoy the memes. We all enjoy the memes.
I mean, it's really not a bad idea, you know, to gather, you know, the richest 1% and grind them into cat food. It's not a bad thing, you know. Okay. Cats gotta eat.
We can joke. We can joke about that. We can have our fun. But you know,
but who's gonna? Yeah, but who's gonna feed the poor? Who's gonna fix the violent problems that we have as in our society? How are we gonna deal with the here and now?
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's a nice fantasy. They make I'm pretty sure they make exquisite cat food. I'm absolutely convinced of that. But we need to deal with the here and now, with the now, the people who are unemployed now, with the people who are depressed now, with the people who are sick right now, who have mental illness, who have chronic illness. We have to deal with the people, and that doesn't require picking a gun and go all larpy. It requires actual boots on the ground, actual, you know, food banks, actual free clothes stores, and actual donations, actual, you know.
That's so important.
You know how it goes.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, I really, really liked the framing of when we describe these capital R revolutionary ideas as being masculinist. I really love that, because I think that's really important, because Javi, a lot of the things that you've just described are very much about giving care, you know, actually helping people, actually doing things.
Yeah.
Whereas I think a lot of people are really, especially people on the left, we're very frustrated. We're angry. We're feeling aggressive. We become aware of this exploitation, and so we get mad. Especially people who identify as men, you know, because you know, we've talked about this on the stream a couple of times. You know, as men, we tend to be given like two emotions that we can usually get away with. You know, and one of those is anger, and the other one is kind of, I don't know if you can call it an emotion. Just like to retreat, to sort of go into your man cave and just sort of retreat. So if you're upset, that's what you do. You get angry, or you retreat and you go off and, you know, you do your thing. You go climb a mountain or some shit, you know.
Don't let anybody cry.
That's it exactly. So our reactions, our ways forward, all tend to be like about those things. Tends to be about getting angry and taking up guns and fighting and smashing and destroying and all of those things. It's not about getting out and helping homeless people. It's not, you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of an extension of, I think it's an extension of how men are sort of taught to behave in society, and we're replicating this patriarchal bullshit in our movements, which are meant to like fight against it. I remember I was students, and they were saying that there's like they were part of like a communist party in Brazil, and they were saying that there was like one party or one group. It was called something like the women's group or the women's party, and it was just a bunch of men sitting around, like literally, and all like cis het men just sitting around. This is what the women need to do.
No.
you know what I mean? It's just So that's my little.
No, it's so true.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear you say that.
Anyway.
Yeah, because and a lot of people were saying that, like, I mean, it is like difficult to talk about, because it is like, in order to talk about this, you do have to talk in kind of like a binary way. And like, again, like there's nothing that I'm saying that is like essential to men that makes them not, like, of course men are caring and compassionate. Of course women can be angry and like want to be violent, stuff like that. There's nothing inherent in that. But like, we do have to look at the ways that we have been socialized and colonized by these systems and these ways of thought, and then how that's affecting the way that we're framing how we're going to get out of this. And like, you know, as you were saying, like a lot of the framings are kind of this like aligned with like anger or like running, or what is it, recoiling into your cage or whatever.
The man cave.
The man cave, yeah.
I know, right? That's
and
how
like
we dress it up
nobody
as
is
well,
saying,
you know?
Yeah. And like nobody's saying, like we all recognize that this is a very violent system, and people who are I made a whole video about violence and revolutionary violence and slow violence, how like the violence of the system it tends to be like justified, whereas the revolutionary violence doesn't. And I was making a case for like revolutionary violence of people who are under the systemic violence, right? Like we understand that like violent in all cases is not, it's not like terrible necessarily. Like, I mean, it's something that we shouldn't like lust after, but it's obviously something that is necessary for a lot of people who are like under the boot of these oppressive systems. But it's really funny how people will kind of take that and then make that into two extremes. It's like either you're saying that we need a violent revolution and you're being smart and rational and scientific and not idealist and not emotional. Like either you're that, or you're arguing for some like pacifist kind of ridiculous. Like there's no nuance at all, and people have a hard time just reconciling the fact that like, no, I mean, whether violence is necessary or not it's like kind of beside the point that I'm making, because the point is about the way that we frame it and then the way that we approach it, and that's been kind of hard to get across to people.
Yeah. And everybody's got their role in the revolution. And I think a very interesting way is developing like those how do you call them? Parallel power structures? No, it's the other one. Something power structures.
Parallel. Yeah.
And
absolutely. I mean, that's what we need to do. That.
It's like there's I don't know, whatever. The unemployment agency doesn't work. You make one made out of people who works better. So people abandon the official one and enlist to the new one. Social programs don't work. Make solidarity rings and mutual help rings that work and make people go to them. So at some point, exactly. All they have left is the military and the police, and then is when war happens. But if you make war right now, it's like what did the Romans do for us? They gave us the roads and the sewer system. Remember the Monty Python, right?
Oh yeah.
So what did the Romans do for us? So it's the same attitude, and it's very, as you said, connected with that manly man role that we're supposed to fill in, which is everybody's supposed to fill in a role in this shitty society, a role as consumers, a role as men, as women, a role as higher class, as lower class. Everybody has a role to play here. The thing is, are we smart enough not to play those roles and to do better than that? I think that's the question. Absolutely. Are we smart enough to unlearn those bullshits and do better than that?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much unlearning that we have to do.
Yeah. And there's
sorry, were you gonna say something?
There's this also this saying that says, about the rage. Everybody's angry as fuck, both women and men alike. Because there's this systemic oppression. Well, there's a saying in the Spanish alternative circles that it goes like "organiza tu rabia," organize your rage. Like it's okay to have, just be smart enough to drive it in a way that drives for social change.
I think though that like with the rage and anger thing, I think that goes back to what Paul, you were saying about how men and women are socialized differently, because I've been reading a lot about people that are talking about how female anger has just been like pushed down so much because its transformative social and political power terrifies people, and I feel like, or terrifies the elite at least. So like the more you can get women to be more passive and caring and kind, or like those, rather than angry, the less like we're gonna stand up for ourselves and like fight patriarchy and fight the systems of oppression that like we're facing. And I think this is even more for like women of color. Like they're, as soon as like they're angry about anything, a lot of the time they're like push back against. And I kind of think that in some ways, I don't know, I'm not saying that we need to be angry in order to change, to like create any change, but as on some levels, maybe that's something that we should be like aware of, or maybe be doing something to fight against, to like, I don't know, what do you think?
I think it's okay to be angry. It's they're doing this to us. What we need to know is what to do with it. Are we gonna shoot? Are we gonna shoot our rage to the person next to us, to the person below us, or are we gonna shoot to the top?
Yeah.
If you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of a difficult question because, like, yeah, of course, like we should be angry, and like I'm angry all the time at the system. Like it, like really upsets me. I like, especially like dealing with chronic illness and like having to work all the time. Like I'm fucking mad, like a lot of the time. But I don't know. I also like. I've always been kind of like into like Buddhist philosophy as well. And so just the idea of like anger is like totally natural, and like, suffering is normal, and like being pissed and all of that. But that like, it's actually an emotion that like harms you a lot of the time, like more than the other person, you know what I mean? This is kind of hard to like explain, but anyway, I definitely think that like it's very obvious that like everyone should be like super fucking angry at what's going on. But I think that like if you're trying to like organize from the emotional standpoint of like anger, like that's not going to be super productive. Like we actually have to like come together and like grieve together and like work on like collective ways of healing the anger, so that like we can like transform that into something productive for building loving communities together, you know what I mean? Because if our flex is anger, and that's the same thing, like if our flex is like love and solidarity and coming together to like overcome all of this hardship and like get through this anger that we're feeling together, and like build something new and like defend it. Like obviously we have to defend it, then like that's what we're going to spend our time doing. But if our flex is anger, then we're going to spend our time trying to just like fight the war, which like may or may not be successful, first of all, and even just winning the war. But then if we do win the war, then like we're just a bunch of like angry traumatized people that like haven't really dealt with that that well,
Right on.
So,
right on. Yes, so true. So true.
That it kind of brings me back to the sort of the ideas that people have around like social democracy, like around like how a lot of people just outright reject it rather than seeing it as like one stop along the way to something much more robust, because like people, and this also gets back to what Catherine was saying as well about like we need to look after people like in the immediate term. If people are homeless, if people are in like the worst conditions you can imagine for any number of reasons, like we need to look after them. We need to heal them, to look after them, and then maybe they can more actively participate in our movement and stuff. So it's really, really important. And then builds. I know some people
absolutely.
With that.
And if we're bickering against each other, and it's such a waste of time and energy. We should be healing each other and growing that, nurturing that anger so it doesn't hurt any of us, and point it upwards where it should be directed. And also, being skillful and smart enough and play it well, so the least number of people are hurt in the process. And the most number of people benefit of the process and the outcome eventually, which there is never an outcome. I mean, utopia, I always say it's like the horizon. You go in a direction, but you never get there.
Yes.
And it's okay not to get there. It's okay not to get there. Just keep going because you're improving.
Yes.
Improving people's lives.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's like one of my favorite quotes basically says that it's like, what's the point of utopia? Like, it's just to keep you moving forward. Like, that's the point of it, you know? Like,
Yeah.
it's always going to be the horizon, but it's there to keep you moving forward. And I think that, like, yeah, I think if we limit our horizon to just like overthrowing people, getting rid of them, and like that's our horizon, then like we might not even land there. It's like that's stupid, like, you know, aim for the stars and you'll land in the clouds or whatever, you know. It's like if we're aiming there, then like we're gonna land probably less than there, actually. So if we're aiming for the utopia and we're planning and building that, then like, yeah, we're probably not gonna get there, but like we'll at least land somewhere like way better, you know.
Totally.
Yeah. And this really reminds me of the fact that, like, one of the, or probably the most common question I get online is like, what is your tendency? And like immediately, if you go into any kind of socialist space, I feel like the first question is like, yeah, are you a Marxist? Are you an anarchist? Are you a Marxist-Leninist? And like immediately sort of putting you into this box, okay, you're one of those, and that means this, as opposed to like,
Yeah.
we all like have similar goals. We all like want to create change and like think that the way people are treated is really bad, and like let's see how we can come together and do this together. But instead it's like, oh, that's the first most important thing. And I guess like it does say something about, I don't know, like maybe, but it's also just really alienating for so many people, because I remember bringing one of my friends to a socialist event, and she just like was bombarded with these questions about what her beliefs were about this and that, and like she had no idea, because she was just like, she just had a general idea. She didn't like how the system was structured, but then she felt like completely like she wasn't like allowed into that space because she just didn't have this background knowledge. And I don't know, I think it's so problematic for alienating everyone, or like it just becomes so puritanical about your beliefs.
Yeah,
And I don't know.
absolutely. And discussing, like, we never end up discussing the here and now. It always ends up being like, because once you ask that question of like, what's your tendency, and then you start getting into it, it always inevitably just brings the conversation back like 200 years, where people just start arguing about like, well, like Trotsky said this, and then don't you remember this happened, and then the anarchists were shot, and then this happened, you know. And it's just like, okay, can we talk about actually today? What are we doing today? Like, what's your issue today? How are we going to organize food security in an urban setting for the coming apocalypse? How are we going to organize this? Like, how are we going to literally do these really important things? Like, I like, stop talking about this, you know. It's like, it's such a weird thing. And I always refuse to like give, you know, if somebody asks me like, what's your tendency? Like, I always refuse. I'm just like, I'm not saying anything, because even in my last video where I was like seemingly getting more, you know, sectarian in my analysis, I mean, parts of my analysis sounded like things that Mao said, parts of my analysis sounded like things that Trotsky said, parts of my analysis sounded like things that Bookchin or other people said, and then a lot of it sounded like what indigenous scholars have said, and feminist scholars, and people who aren't just, you know, the handful of like years that we look back to decide which one of our tendencies we are, you know what I mean? It's just, yeah, it's super frustrating and not productive.
Yeah. And
because I'm like, yeah, to be fierce of today, you have to like synthesize. Like, critical thinking is not just taking whatever one person said and then like adopting that as your position. Critical thinking is looking at the whole gambit of every idea that's out there, and then synthesizing those and coming up with something that makes sense for the here and now, you know?
And the place and the local, because every local circumstance is different. It's what's the problem with grabbing a page from everybody's book, you know?
Yeah.
They're all good ideas out there, and there's so many of them. Why dismiss? Why would you choose? I think it has to do like a couple of things. One of them is our consumerist education. programming. We choose brands. So we get Marxist-Leninist, or we get purely anarcho-communist. We choose brands. We choose a team and side with it no matter what. And it's like, really? Because, things, pages from one book are going to solve one thing for our local and our here and now. And some other pages from another book are going to help with other problems and other issues. And pretending there is this one for all recipe for everybody is such a piece of bullshit. And it's a little bit, throw a pinch of insecurity there, a pinch of consumerist programming there, and you got the whole mix, and you got the whole cannibal left ready to bicker at each other incessantly and pretending we're doing a revolution. It's like
yeah. And I think it's not just about the fact that we're focused on the past, but the type of things in the past that we're focused on. It's all these like one revolutionary events or these individuals in history at the expense of focusing also on like smaller revolts or people coming together and like how they like. It seems like the only things we're learning from are those like Stalin and like these big individuals or these big revolutions. But there's so much else, like other elements that we should also be focusing on that were also important other than these. Because then I guess it makes it all about making it about one individual leading us again, or making it about the capital R revolution again. And then if, like you said in one of your podcasts, if you're just focusing on the individual, like as soon as that individual is gone, what do you have left? I don't know. I think we need to speak about the past, or the way that we tell stories from the past needs to be very different as well.
Yeah, like we focus on the instances of like spectacularized violence or like spectacular leaders or whatever, and we don't focus on like, okay, well at the very local level, like how are people organizing food serves and like community garden, like how are people doing that? Like nobody talks about that. We just talk about like the major wars that were won, or like the major, you know what I mean? It's just, it's men playing war games, and I'm like very sick of it, because I'm like, yes, we need to do something, we need to be militant, etc., but like I just feel like that's gonna just screw it up in the future. I'm like, patriarchy is honestly gonna keep us from like reaching full communism. And as well, like I kind of see this like Eurocentric flex as being tied up with like patriarchy and capitalism as well. And this is like the flex that's like, we don't need decolonization, or like, indigenous people will have nothing. Like, why would we listen to them? Like, they're just one, minorities, one racial minority. A racial minority should not have precedence over the entire proletariat, and we can't essentialize them, blah, blah, blah. And just people really holding tight to this idea that like, colonialism and capitalism, they were actually good. They advanced the material conditions, which is the precondition for socialism. And it's like, okay, a lot of these indigenous nations were actually living in ways that more closely resemble anarchism or socialism before we wiped them out to advance, quote unquote, the material conditions in order to get back to socialism or anarchism. Like that's already problematic. But, basically all of our tendencies are Eurocentric, because they're all written by like European white dudes. Like there's obviously like, and there's Rosa Luxemburg, like there's not like 100% white men from Europe, but like a lot of our tendencies are just centered around like those kinds of spectacular figures. And of course they're going to have Eurocentric perspectives. Like, of course they're not going to have very deeply like indigenous sovereignty or leadership or reciprocity or alternative worldviews or things like that, and I think this goes along with this framing of, capital R revolution, or certain tendencies as being more materialist and more scientific. Like, along with that dichotomy of posing the rational, the scientific, alongside the masculine, and then opposing that to the feminine, the emotional, the spiritual, the pseudoscientific of Indigenous people and women, etc. Along with that, also, along with that binary is kind of like the Eurocentric vision of progress. It's this linear vision of progress. It goes along with white man's burden, basically, because the opposite of that on the same binary is the like backwards, the uncivilized, the least advanced people, blah, blah, blah. So like that same dichotomy also, I think, prioritizes just Eurocentric linear visions of progress, which are also, that's what I was trying to get at with like the environmental and the reciprocity part, was that, and I'm basically just saying like everything that I'm saying in my follow-up video, but, replacing one linear system, capitalism, which is unsustainable, with another system based on this linear Eurocentric vision of progress is not going to be sustainable. Like, we're not going to be able to reduce the amount of Earths that we need to sustain ourselves in the West that much if we're just basically centralizing like work and production and then like continuing on a pace, right? Like the opposite of that would be a circle, not another line, right? I don't know if that's making sense, but
no,
yeah,
absolutely.
that was another like annoying thing.
Yeah, definitely. This is the white, the whiteness. It's like you're describing the whole LARPy package there.
Yeah.
Hell yeah! Listen,
Yes.
Gang, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna have to take off. I'm gonna go back to bed. Crawl back into bed. I'm so sorry to cut this short. You guys keep going. This is an amazing conversation. I'm definitely gonna be watching this, but I'm gonna have to take off. So thank you, Mexie. Thank you so much for coming on the stream. It's so awesome to talk to you. And,
thank you.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah, I hope
bye,
you
guys.
feel better soon, Paul.
Very dear Paul. Get well.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, I think everybody's a little bit sick here, so I feel like a bit of a shit for sort of the result of that.
Good,
But
yeah.
awesome. So
All
thanks so
good.
much. Love you all. Take care. Bye bye, guys. See you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, I think you've said that all so well, Mexie. I don't really have anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's like you nailed it.
But
Thank you.
As usual.
I guess another thing I wanted to talk about as well is like what you touched on about pleasure activism, because I'm just getting really frustrated with the fact that I feel like so many leftist spaces make it so unenjoyable to be part of them, partially because of all the stuff that we talked about already, about infighting and arguing and like all of that, but also it's just sort of like burnout is kind of fetishized, like working all the time is kind of fetishized. It's all these kind of super capitalist things of like hard work and burnout and all of the it kind of very individualistic as well, in terms of like I as a one person have to do all this stuff. And I've just seen so many people like become so burnt out, and I constantly feel this need to be productive all the time and like do more work for to create change, and I don't feel like I'm doing enough, and I need to learn more and know all the stuff about what's going on in the news, and like kind of like what we talked about always having an opinion. And then these spaces, it's always like so many people that I know in real life have just sort of said to me, like, I just don't want to be involved in this anymore. I just want to enjoy my life. It's just becoming too stressful. It's just too much, whatever, which is like very privileged, of course, to have that kind of, to be able to like step away from it. But also, like, we're doing something very wrong if like every time I go to a meeting, I'm sort of like not really looking forward to it because I don't feel like, it's an enjoyable space to be, or like we're not going to get that done, or like, and we have to, if we want to mobilize more and more people, we have to be like, be the ones that are fun, be the ones that are like enjoyable to be around, and that are like a loving community, because like we have to prefigurate what we want the world to look like afterwards. And if people associate us with like the boring activists that we think that we're better than other people, and like all of this stuff, then one, we're like burning out the people that we already have in our movement, and like that's not going to be sustainable because more and more people are dropping out. And two, we're not going to get anyone to like want to come along. Trying to get my friends to come along to any of my like meetings is like so difficult because they're like, oh no, that's gonna be horrible. So I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think in a lot of these spaces, like we focus a lot. I mean, I guess it makes sense because we're trying to like educate the public about how bad capitalism is. But I feel like in a lot of these spaces, we focus so much on the on just like critique, and it'll be like, oh, this is this terrible thing that's happening, and this is how it relates to capitalism, and capitalism is so terrible. And that's kind of the whole point of like the gathering or whatever. And like obviously that's a big part of it, but I feel like it's not very it's depressing, right? It's just like it's depressing to be in spaces where you're just like constantly like, of course we know that capitalism is terrible and it's all of these things. We don't need to have like more and more and more talks about this. So it just becomes kind of a downer. And then of course people are already struggling with, depression and anxiety and all this stuff with the state of our world today and climate change and what's going on with capitalism, et cetera. So I really feel like if we're not actually building spaces where people can come and heal together and have fun together and talk about building things together. Like, okay, well, this is the shit that's happening, but like, here's some ways that we're going to like have, build something better and also like have a lot of fun doing it. And also like heal our traumas together while we're doing it. Like maybe we need space for people to come together and talk about their eco grief and like feel connected to other people. And build community in that way and in really like intimate ways where we're getting to know each other and be vulnerable with one another and like opening up and like helping each other through these things instead of just like, this is everything that's happening and it's so terrible. And like, we have to overthrow this. And like, of course we do, but like having that be the focus of everything that we do and talk about is A, not pleasurable, and B, it's like, okay, but where's the building part? Like, yes, we're tearing it down. We get it. We're tearing it down. But like, how are we building each other up and holding each other up together through all of this stuff while we're working towards something better,
Yeah.
I think it was Buenaventura Durruti who said, llevamos un nuevo mundo en nuestros corazones. We carried a new world inside our hearts. And in a way, maybe we should become that new world that we want to make. Like, if we want that change, we need to be that change. We need to be that better place where people want to be. As you say, that company, one of the very specific things that capitalism does with us is isolate us. They make us feel isolated. They have us here sitting online in front of a computer all day, every day. You all people, come on, go out if you can. Otherwise, we keep you company. We're here. We keep you company.
Yeah.
But you know what I'm saying? They atomize us. They make us into individuals, because if we work as a collective, and a happy collective, that for that matter, we can find that happiness with each other, instead of isolated and scared of each other and cornered, like what are these people up to? They're out to get me. So we need to become. It's a major political responsibility to become that change ourselves, and not ourselves as individuals, but as ourselves as group as well.
Exactly.
Be wholesome to your cause. We're here for each other. Come on. It's not so difficult. People get super scared of that and get like, you see that rush in their eyes. Like they're like scared to be wholesome to each other. And when we talk about being good to each other, you see that they get stiff. Like when you hug someone and you get the stiff hug. Have you ever? You probably have. Go hug someone and they get, and they don't know what
definitely.
to do. That's that.
And like, and like, also people frame it, like even if yeah, people do frame it as like, oh, like they don't really know what to do with that. They're uncomfortable with that kind of like display of vulnerability or emotion or whatever. But also people really frame it as like, we don't have time for that. Like we don't have time to create eco grief circles and work on collective healing and, you know, build intimate relationships that are really fulfilling with our comrades. Like all we have time for is coming together and discussing revolutionary strategy. Like that's all we have to do, you know,
in the 19th century.
Yeah. And we're like, we don't have time to organize like community food serves and like, you know, all this other stuff, right? It's just all we have time for is discussing revolutionary strategy, you know? And we're not really doing, we're not doing a lot of the work that we do need to do in terms of like collective healing and also, bringing joy to the movement and making it something that everyone wants to join. And like, you know, a lot of people in Canada, like they're feeling the eco grief. Maybe they're not like socialists, but they're like social democrats or whatever. That's like a lot of people in Canada. Like they're on board with the fact that like they want people to have better. They're not on board with like free market capitalism, etc. They're really upset about what's going on. But we don't have any spaces to really kind of like bring them in like a joyful and empathetic way. We just have the like, well, then come to this revolutionary meeting and we're going to talk about overthrowing the state, you know? And people are just like, whoa, like, hang on, you know? And I don't think we're doing a really great job reaching a lot of people. And making it something that people are like really excited about. And I mean, like if we like if like you and I and like we're not even that excited to be in a lot of these spaces, or we find them depressing and alienating a lot of the times, then like imagine just like normies going into that space, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And I do also wonder to what extent like online breadtube, leftube, whatever you call it, is kind of contributing to this problem of like how we're viewing the left in general. And like I'm not exempt from this at all, but I guess like the image that people get when they see us online is often, one, it's very individualistic because it tends to be like one person's YouTube channel on their own. And I guess more and more collaborations are happening, but it's still not like very community based at all. And secondly, the type of like content is often like debates or like response videos to some like right-wing person, or it's like very kind of depressing topic, and it's not really about like the building anything. It's like a lot of critique, and it's a lot of like just really not that kind of depressing content, or like not that humorful a lot of the time. And like I said, I'm definitely part of this, but like if people go onto like, you know, right-wing YouTube channels, and a lot of the time they're maybe more funny, or they go onto like, or they'd much rather watch like a haul video which like promoting mass consumerism and all of that, and because it's more fun than if you look on like leftist YouTube. I don't know if we're contributing to this problem in some ways, but I'm not really sure how.
Totally. Yeah, and like when you watch things that are kind of more, you know, like here's a zero waste video, like there's so many people who are into that stuff because they do recognize that there's a problem, they're upset about it, and they want to do something about it, you know? And like showing people like, okay, here's a zero waste thing you can do. Like obviously that's not like an effectual way to like stop climate change, but people who can at least look at that and be like, okay, great, like here's something I can do, right? And when you're not really like, when you're only giving people the tools of critique, and then the thing that you're saying is going to solve everything is overthrowing capitalism, people are like, okay, so what do I do for that? You know, like, okay, like, and then people are, it just increases their kind of like depression and apathy, I think. Because like if you're only giving people certain tools, then like those are the tools they're going to use. And I'm very guilty of this because like most of my videos are just like political economic critique of what's going on. And most people will comment on my shit about how it's like so depressing. So I'm like trying now to look more into like, okay, how can we like build? How can we make things more pleasurable and stuff? And that's why, again, I love Adrienne Marie Brown and Autumn Brown and their podcast, because they talk about that quite a lot. But I also think like LeftTube and just like leftist Twitter and stuff is also kind of contributing to these problems, because like a lot of people are just like, oh, you're just responding to straw men. Like you're just responding to, 20-year-old kids on Twitter who have just like read Lenin and like are super obnoxious about it,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, our online discourse is very, like aggressive and like capitalist, patriarchal, like everything that we just said.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. But unfortunately, I'm also seeing all of this like leftist meme stuff. Actually, it's influencing people in their real life, like people that I see that are organizing and stuff and doing stuff around me. And that's really worrying, because I'm like, well, this isn't just an internet meme anymore, because people are actually carrying this out into the real world and the everyday space, and we're just having like in real life debates about like tendency and like all of this stuff, but in a really, really unproductive way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I do think maybe all of this online stuff is like contributing to the problem, because like the way that you interact with somebody online is obviously different than how you interact with someone in real life. But if the way that we're interacting online is bleeding into our in real life spaces, then that's a huge problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but practicing another way of interacting online could be like a first step. Now that we are aware of the problem, if you know what I mean, we can deconstruct it in a way. And I think what we're doing here with the Socialist Sunday stream is all about bringing people in, bringing guests, and what you do at the Vegan Vanguard as well is bringing guests, connecting to other people, and having conversations with other people. And having those conversations be fun, and having those conversations being engaging and interesting. And you succeeded with that. And I hope we're doing the right thing in here. Me, myself, I'm the clown in this. Yeah, me, myself, I'm the clown in this thing. I can get to sing. So yeah, I don't know. I hope this helps a little bit. Guitar strumming.
Totally,
and whatnot,
it totally does. Absolutely. No, I love what you do, and I love what you guys do on the Socialist stream. So like, yeah, absolutely, I agree. But yeah, I do think we need to start practicing better engagement and like better stuff online, knowing that it'll probably be carried offline as well.
Twitter kindness, that would be a thing. I tried to show support to a lot of people online.
Hashtag like, Twitter kindness.
Publicly online, be like, hey, get better, be well, hey, solidarity. We throw a lot of things. I got this thing with the croutons. I'm throwing croutons to everybody online. Yo, croutons for you, croutons here for you. And it's like a coded thing, to show support to people. I don't know, and
and like I try to reach out, like if I like I try to reach out, like if I see someone who seems to be like struggling or posting about like depression and stuff, like I'll try to like reach out and be like, hey, like, let's talk about it, or you know what I mean? Because it's like we have to support each other through all this shit. That's what solidarity is. That's what being a comrade is. It's not just like, okay, here's our strategy, let's execute the strategy. The end.
Yeah. And that's what I love about Adrienne Marie Brown as well, is that like if I see her or watch her, I saw some like clips on YouTube from like her speaking events, and she just makes me want to be like, oh yeah, I want to be like her. She just seems so happy and enjoys herself, and like, and that's what we need more of, to see more representation of like actually being a leftist is like really fun. And that's why I really like how like Thought Slime, they make videos about like skateboarding and stuff like that. I think it's really like they tweet about it, and I think that's really like great, because it's like, actually, you can still like do leftist stuff, but then also have your hobby on the side, and that's like, yeah, I don't know. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I love Adrienne Marie Brown and Autumn Brown for that, and I love Thought Slime is awesome. Love Thought Slime, and I love Robin Wall Kimmerer for that too. Just like reading her books is just like, this is so. Oh, it's just a breath of fresh air. It's like, this is exactly what I need to hear, and this is exactly the kind of energy that like I need to like have in my life. You know, it's really it makes me feel hopeful, which is really important, because I think a lot of us just feel really just upset and disheartened, and like the task in front of us is so big, and it is, but like it's important to still have that like hope and joy and feeling good while you're doing this stuff.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Combe Clem, she's fantastic, and she has like a lot of these fantastic ingredients in her glorious Trojan horse of a show, you know.
Yeah.
And her show is based on having guests and putting makeup on them. Catherine, you've been with her actually in one of the shows. It was glorious.
Yeah, she's great.
That's so cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Mexie, I also wanted to ask you about, I guess you kind of touched on this earlier, but like your experiences of being like a woman like online on LeftTube, and like also with the chronic illness, and like how, I don't know if you feel comfortable to share stuff, but like your specific experiences, because like especially I guess when you started, I guess it was very much like more male dominated, and and it still is.
Well, I mean, speaking of my chronic illness, I probably will have to go soon because I'm feeling kind of tired.
About it.
But I don't know. I think that I've been like fairly privileged though, like as like a white woman who, I don't know, like people like men basically tend to think that I'm like, you know, I look decently attractive. Like people, I don't look like, I guess people that they would typically like come at for how they dress, how they look, you know, I'm not part of a minority. I don't have a lot of, I mean, I have like technically a disability, but you know, I'm very privileged in this space. And so like I got a lot of like people sexualizing me and whatever. I got a lot of right-wing people and even left-wing people, like kind of like more reactionary left-wing people who disagree with me, you know, just telling me that like women have no place in politics and like, you know, basically just shut up. So, you know, like I do get pushback, but I think overall I've been like, I'm pretty privileged in this space compared to a lot of other creators who face like a lot worse backlash. But I mean, when I first joined, it was kind of funny because it was kind of me, and then I remember I joined this chat group. I'm still in it, and I love everyone in it. Like they're awesome, but it was basically like the majority like 18, 19, 20-year-old boys and then me. And I remember I was just like, oh cool, okay, like this is new. And at first like there was a lot of kind of like reactionary takes in there, or just like pretty, you know, whatever, teenage boy takes about like women and whatever. Not me personally, but like they would talk about other people like that, and I'd be like, oh, this is gross. But, you know, to everyone's credit, like everyone really like grew quite a lot in their political like understanding in a very short time. But yeah, I mean, all of the chat groups, and I was in this other chat group that was, I would say, like 100% young men, and then me. So yeah, I guess it has been a bit interesting that way. But again, I feel like, I mean, people dislike me, I think, or like a lot of people who are more LARPy dislike me because I guess I started out only talking about the material conditions because I was too afraid to talk about anything else, because I knew that I would be laughed out of the room or just dismissed or canceled or whatever. And so now I'm a lot more comfortable talking about stuff like that. But then I still obviously get all of the pushback from people who just hate that and want me to just go back to talking about only the material conditions. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting to like hear your experiences. Yeah, we can end the stream.
How about you?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of been the same as like I get a lot of like comments on my appearance that I feel like probably a lot more than like men that I've spoken to, or like comments on my voice and like being young and that I don't know what I'm talking about. And I guess, yeah, like a lot of the time, instead of attacking what I have to say, it will be like if when I made the vegan video, it was all about, oh, you like malnourished, you need to eat meat, or you eat meat and then you'll get bigger boobs, or like kind of very gendered ways of like trying to attack my ideas, which, and
I get all of that too.
Yeah,
for sure.
I definitely feel like there's definitely a big barrier to entry as a woman, like as any minority, obviously, online, because I don't know, I was really worried before coming on that no one would take me seriously, and that, or like, you know, you have to, because you see so many people on YouTube that are like beauty channels or lifestyle channels, and they're like very conventionally attractive, so you feel like, oh, you know, you're not attractive enough for this, or like all this like bullshit. But in general, I think like the community has been really amazing. It's more, just like a few shitty things like that. But I also have privileges, and like I have like a British accent and stuff like that like help, and like I'm cis, I'm straight, all of that. So yeah.
I mean, it is hard. I mean, growing up, it was always like annoying. I always hated being a woman growing up because I always felt like I had to work so much harder to get people to take me seriously, even when, you know, like they were saying wasn't really that, like they didn't do that great of an analysis or whatever, but like people, like I would have to work so much harder. So I think that's why when I first came on, I did, like when I first came on, I was like, I really did just want to talk about the material conditions because I thought that was the most important thing. And I guess, I was pretty nervous to maybe say something wrong, because in a male dominated space, if you're a woman and you say something wrong, then like you're done. You know what I mean? It's, oh, this woman's hysterical. This, like, why would I listen to this woman? Like, unless you're saying what the men want you to say, you're done, you know? Because why would they come back? They would just be like, oh, this woman is just hysterical and she has nothing to offer. Why would I listen to her? So that was always kind of a concern of mine. And I think that's why like my latest video was kind of vulnerable for me to put out, because I knew that I would get that reaction. And a lot of people would be like, okay, you're done. I have nothing more to learn from you. I have nothing more, like you have nothing more to offer me. And I think a lot of people do feel that way at this point. But I think hopefully, I don't know, it's important to move away from that. So
they have to deal with their fear first and their bullshit. It's not your problem, really.
Yeah.
And for what it's worth, it goes for both of you. From me as an observer from the outside, from the very first time I saw either of your videos, you both came across as incredibly knowledgeable people. Like, you know your shit. I was thoroughly impressed by both of you, because you know your shit, and it is incredibly, in your case, Catherine, it's incredibly surprising that someone so young to be so knowledgeable and so wise. Like, and you know, for me, you both are eminences. Like your online presence is like, when I see one of your videos, it's like, okay, let's sit down. I'm here to learn. Bring it on. You know what I'm saying? Because you both know your shit, awesome. And you can tell. You can really tell.
Thank you.
I'm telling you right now.
Thank you. That's
really nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
It is the truth. I think everybody on the chat will agree with that. Probably.
Yeah, I'm really
Awesome.
like
Thank you so much.
cognizant of the fact that like you're like feeling really tired. So I guess maybe we could just quickly go
Oh,
over
yeah.
Let's wrap it up. Can I wrap it
yeah.
up with a song or something?
Yeah, I just wanted
Yes.
I just wanted to ask
Mexie, yeah.
first if you like have any, I don't know, for anything that we talked about, any like tips or like, I guess going into solutions now, I guess maybe it's a bit too much, but I don't know, like, is there anything else you wanted to mention from everything we've talked about?
Oh, geez. I guess, like if you're going to be engaging in spaces, I guess I would just like hope that people could engage with more humility and to really, really check and think about like, I don't know, how you're engaging in the space. And I mean, yeah, I don't know if I have any like specific tips, but I guess, approaching things with humility and wonder is like kind of step one so that you don't end up replicating all of this like capitalist patriarchal shit in your organizing spaces. And also to, I guess, try to earnestly kind of be the theorist of today and look around you about like what is happening, what can I influence, what would be needed here, like synthesize stuff, you know what I mean? And I guess try to move away from just flexing like your position is the only right position and that like you have nothing to learn from anybody else, because it's not productive in any space, especially when you're trying to build community with people and like come to actual solutions together. So
yeah.
Yeah. So like come from a place of empathy. We're supposed to be the left. Lead by freaking example. Lead by example.
Yes.
Don't be shitty to people. Like, I remember having made a video that is called like What is the Left? And one of my first videos. And I went like around like a lot of stuff. And at the end I went like I grabbed the camera in my hand and I finished shooting it. It's like, I don't even know what the fuck is the left. Just don't be shitty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So do you want to sing the song, Cami?
Let's do it. This is a Public Enemy. And thank you all for coming. Thank you, Mexie. You rock.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Catherine,
both.
for
I love
taking.
You both.
Oh, you're awesome. You both rock. But thank you, Paul, for being there even when
Paul.
sick as a dog, and get well. And thank you all, everybody in the chat. We had some really all-star awesome people here, and let's rock it.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, do you know what it means to have a revolution? And what it takes to give a solution? We're battling against oppression, oh yeah, while fighting with our depression, oh yeah. Thank you all for coming. This is the Socialist Sunday Stream.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Woo! Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.